Hi everyone, and welcome to Live Your Language, tips and inspiration for your bilingual life. I'm Stephanie, a PhD student in second language acquisition and a mother to two children that I'm raising bilingually in my non-native language of French. Today I'm going to be talking about something that a lot of you have asked me about, and that is concerning au pairs. I recently had an au pair for 2 months, and I'm expecting to have another au pair really soon, in the fall actually. And while I don't consider myself an expert by any means on this topic, having hosted an au pair for just 2 months already, I do have a couple ideas on this topic, and if that is something that you're considering as language support for your children and as a puzzle piece to your bilingual puzzle, then keep listening because this video is for you. So the way that I'm going to do this video is because there are so many videos out there that just give general tips about having au pairs, I'm going to focus only on linguistic tips, things that concern language and the language input that your au pair is going to provide to your children. So let's dive right in. Okay, the very first thing that I want to say about hosting an au pair, or really about any native speaker of a language, is that you have to keep in mind that just because they're a native speaker, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're trained to teach a language. I know that a lot of au pairs get the request to speak their native tongue with the children that they're watching, but this is kind of daunting because especially if the children are older, like like 3 or 4, a lot of times they already have like a fully formed first or second language. With this sort of thing, you really need to offer a little bit of support and a little bit of a transition period so that the kids don't get frustrated or reject the language altogether. So I do have a couple tips to ease into that. So one thing that I would say, definitely make sure that your linguistic expectations are put up front. I would suggest that when you are matching with the au pair, I'm not sure how it works with other agencies, but the one that we used in the United States, it was really up to the host parents to reach out to au pairs and find a good match for your family. So I would say that in the matching stage, or even in your profile, in your host family profile, make sure that you put in there somewhere that we are expecting the au pair to speak his or her native language to our children. That is really important because a lot of times au pairs will come to your country in order to improve their language. In our case, it's English. So a lot of au pairs are kind of dissuaded by the idea that they'll be speaking their native language all day. So that's just something that you need to say up front, and make sure also that you're taking into account their need for the majority language input. So in our case, like I said, it's English. So what I have done with our au pair, and what I plan to do with the next au pair, is to make sure that even though I'm asking them to speak their native tongue with the kids all the time, that they know that I will be giving them private English lessons, just because I also teach English. I love teaching English. It's one of my passions. It's what I have my master's degree in, so I'm absolutely happy to do that for my au pairs. You don't, of course, need a degree or anything like that, but just make sure that you do find a way to fill that need that they have to speak English. So I say that I'm going to teach them private English lessons once or twice a week. I suggest that we watch a series together, like a TV series, and pause it and then just discuss the language, but I tailor it to whatever they want. So like my last au pair really liked reading fiction and a particular author, so I tried to find this author in translation, and I thought that we can maybe read that book together and talk about it and kind of have like a book club. At the very minimum though, I make sure that they know that at dinner time, which happens every day for us it's like 5:30, that we're gonna switch to English, just to make sure that they get that English input. Just make sure that you keep that in mind, and that while you're asking them to speak their native language, that you have something to offer linguistically in return. The next tip that I offer, I'm not quite sure about. So I have read that some people suggest looking for an extrovert as an au pair because extroverts presumably speak a lot more, and maybe they'll end up providing more input to your children, and they'll open up a lot more quickly and have less trouble bonding, I guess, with the children. So I'm not sure how I feel about that. My last au pair was an introvert, and I just feel like they had no problem, just because a lot of our interactions are going to be one-on-one, especially with the children. Maybe it's more important for the host parents, but anyway, I can't quite say that I approve this piece of advice, but it's just something to keep in mind. So my third piece of advice for supporting the au pair linguistically in helping your children is that you do coach them a little bit on what to do. For example, I made sure that I told the au pair when he does produce something that's a little off, like he says something wrong, that you can just provide a model. You just do a recast, like re-say what he said, but say it properly. And instead of just accepting what he says and going on with it, because that way he doesn't really have any feedback, he doesn't know what he should say. And I find that children are super receptive to this. They just use whatever they have in their little linguistic arsenal, and they pick up really quickly on those sorts of recasts and suggestions. There's like no resistance, no embarrassment whatsoever. Another tip that I have, kind of going along the same lines of this, is that you encourage discussions at mealtime. So I know that at least for young kids, it's really difficult for au pairs to have like non-stop on the clock time with their kids. But I really try to dissuade my au pairs from using lunchtime with my kids as like a time to check their phone and like get updates and that sort of thing. Just because I feel like lunchtime is a time for like really great conversation that's not quite the same as the conversation that you would have while you're playing. So I really try my best to encourage conversation at this time, just by mentioning it. Sometimes mentioning it once is all that you need. Another thing is cell phone use. So you might just say like, I prefer that you don't use your cell phone at lunchtime. If you have to check your phone, like check it after or before. My next piece of advice is to keep in mind what language gaps you have and start to think of ways that you can encourage the au pair and your child to interact in such a way that will fill those gaps. So for example, one of the gaps that I realized we had is I never really talk about math with my son in French. So like addition, adding, subtracting, dividing, those sorts of words, even the word for like counting, I always got wrong. So one day I just said like, hey, this is a book, a book about addition and subtraction. Can you just like talk to him about this book? Can you read it together? That would be really great. And in general, a lot of times like au pairs don't necessarily have ideas of what to do every day. They're just everyday people, and a lot of them, like some of them are teachers, but a lot of them aren't. So it helps to give ideas of activities that you can do that day. So by doing this, you can really use that to your advantage by suggesting activities that you know will fill vocabulary gaps. So for us, it was definitely potty time, that sort of thing, addition, subtraction, and there are all sorts of other vocabulary words that will come up. Actually, along those same lines is the next piece of advice which I have, which is while you have somebody who is a native speaker of your target language living in your house, gather and tweak and get the right, nail down the vocabulary as much as you possibly can for those embarrassing situations, like when your children have accidents, potty time, like how do you describe, like, for example, if you have to teach your child to wipe his or her bottom, how do you talk about that? You are never going to find, ever going to find those words in a textbook, and they're really hard to ask people. So I say, like, it's a little embarrassing, but if you get it down this one time, like that will serve you for the rest of your time with your child. So I say definitely gather those awkward and embarrassing vocabulary situations and nail them down while you have this really special situation, this person living in your house who can tell you those sorts of things. So other suggestions, like, what sort of language do you use when your child has an accident, like overnight, if they're or if they made a mess in the bathroom by accident and they had to clean it up, bodily functions like burping and like passing gas, those sorts of things. And also another thing too is like politeness. Make sure that you ask specifically, because a lot of au pairs, and people in general will just be kind. If your child says something that's a little rude, they'll just be nice about it. But it might help just to be forthright and say, like, one thing that we are really struggling with is, because I'm not a native speaker, it's not easy for me to figure out what's polite and what's not polite. So please, if my child says something that's a little too harsh or impolite, please provide a model for something that he can say. Also, child words for these sorts of things. So even if you do find the words for these sorts of topics, you might find them in like adult speak, not kid speak. So you know, there are tons of words for these sorts of bodily functions. So just make sure that you find like a kid-friendly word, because when you look them up in the dictionary, they might just be a little academic or more medical. So just make sure you don't only find a word that describes the function, but a word that is appropriate for usage with a child. Another suggestion is to collect words and vocabulary that have to do with first aid and emergencies. The thing about these sorts of situations is you don't need them until you need them. And when you need them, it's like too late to look things up. I always encourage the people that I speak with to keep your phone handy, like a digital dictionary that you can just look words up really quickly. Well, in these sorts of situations, you don't really have the time to look something up. It's better if you, of course you need to switch, you know, if you had to switch to the majority language just to get things done, it's totally understandable. But I can recall a certain situation where my son accidentally ate some food that was intended for me and my husband that was that was actually really spicy. And so he's like, you know, and he was like pointing to his tongue and he didn't know what to do. And I did not have the vocabulary to talk about what was wrong with him. I didn't know if he bit his tongue or what was going on, you know. Luckily the au pair was there, so she asked him, you know, more pointed questions with really great vocabulary of what to do. But those sorts of situations, that's something that you might want to think about. So even before your au pair comes, I would suggest just keeping in the back of your mind and maybe even writing down those situations where you don't have the words that you need to see the situation through, just so that you can go ahead and ask him or her when they arrive. The next piece of advice I will suggest is to resist hovering around your child and the au pair. So what I have found is that when I hover, the au pair tends to speak to me and not to the child. And I really want them to have those interactions. I also noticed that language is a little bit different, of course, when it's directed to me and not to my child. So I think it's okay to like keep an ear open, but make sure that you're giving them plenty of space for natural interactions. My next piece of advice is to encourage a variety of schedules and activities. So especially with au pairs and any childcare really, you tend to have the same schedule over and over again. But actually, I think that it's important from time to time to try and change the schedule up. Like in our instance, we were able to build in a date night where the au pair had to help with bedtime routines when normally we had her on from, you know, mid-morning until about dinner time. So what this allowed is bath time vocabulary, you know, bath toys, plug, like drain the tub or put in the plug, pour this, you know, all those sorts of words, like, you know, when you have like little rubber duckies and you can like squeeze them, like get the water out, like, and these sorts of things that are kind of difficult to think about as a non-native speaker. And my last piece of advice is to ask for help with translating majority language materials, games, books into the minority language. So one of the things that I asked our au pair to do right before she left was to take just like 2 or 3, of course this is all on the clock, right? You know, it would be really rude to just give her these books at the end of the day and say translate them, no. So what I did is I chose like 3 or 4 books that my son would always ask me to read that just happened to be in the majority language, and that I would have to just kind of make things up. And of course I should have just translated them a long time ago, but what I ended up doing is just like 1 or 2 nights I just sat down and typed up all these translations, and I just asked her like, hey, is this how you would say this? And she said, nope, that's wrong. And she like corrected them all, and I fixed them in my Word document and I printed them out, and now I have, you know, a couple bilingual books, which are fantastic. Thank you so much for watching this video on how to host au pairs in a way that will maximize the language input that your children receive from them. If you like this video, please don't forget to like it and leave me a comment and let me know what you're thinking. Do you like au pairs? Do you not really like the idea of au pairs? Let me know in the comments below. Okay, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.